Good morning, everyone. Today, I want to talk to you about a principle that's deceptively simple, yet profoundly powerful. Never tell people what you do. At first glance, that might sound counterintuitive. After all, in a world driven by personal branding, social media, and self-promotion, why would you not tell people what you do? The answer lies in psychology, human behavior, and the way trust and perception are formed. When you tell someone what you do, especially too soon, you risk creating a cognitive shortcut in their mind. They categorize you, define you, and often underestimate you. This mental tagging process is automatic and unconscious. The human brain is wired to simplify complexity, but in doing so, it strips away nuance, potential, and unpredictability. Three things that are critical if you're trying to build real influence, credibility, or strategic relationships. Instead of telling people what you do, let them feel the impact of what you do. When your work speaks for itself, when your discipline, results, or presence are felt before they are explained, you command attention without asking for it. You foster curiosity, and curiosity is a far more powerful force than explanation. You become the person they want to know more about, not the person trying to explain themselves. And here's the deeper truth. When people don't know what box to put you in, they pay more attention. They watch closely. They ask better questions. They form deeper connections. The most effective communicators, thinkers, and creators let their actions, ideas, and consistency reveal their identity, not their job title, not their elevator pitch. So I invite you to hold some of your cards closer. Let mystery work for you. Let impact speak louder than information. Tell people what you do. Let them experience it. Talking about your goals or identity gives you a dopamine release, similar to achieving them. But this reduces your drive to actually do the work. When people hear what you do, their brain immediately categorizes you, often inaccurately. This triggers unconscious bias and limits their openness to your potential. Human attention spans are short and filtered through past experiences. Over-explaining drains interest. Silence builds anticipation and deeper attention. Neurologically, people respond more strongly to confidence and calm presence than verbal declarations of competence. When people are curious about you, their brains are more likely to remember you, creating stronger and longer-lasting impressions. People don't just hear your words, they feel your emotional state. Demonstrating mastery activates respect, telling them activates skepticism. Withholding information initially, then revealing it through behavior, activates trust networks in the brain more deeply than immediate self-promotion. Humans respond better to observed stories than raw data. If they see what you do, the story forms naturally in their mind, without needing explanation. Leaving gaps in a story forces the brain to stay engaged longer. Mystery triggers problem-solving circuits, which leads to higher focus. Telling people what you do shapes their perception. Showing them through repeated action shapes both their belief and your identity in their minds. When we talk about motivation and goal pursuit, it's important to understand how the brain processes reward. One of the core mechanisms involved is the release of dopamine, a neurotransmitter often misunderstood as the chemical of pleasure. In reality, dopamine is more accurately described as the molecule of motivation, anticipation, and drive. It's what propels us toward goals, fuels effort, and sustains focus over time. Now here's the critical part. The brain doesn't just release dopamine when we achieve a goal. It releases it when we all believe we're making progress toward a meaningful outcome. That means the act of striving, of effort, of moving forward is biologically reinforced. However, there's a twist. When we talk about our intentions, our plans, or even our identity, such as telling others what we do or plan to do, our brain can interpret that as progress. It gives us a premature dopamine reward, tricking the system. In other words, the simple act of announcing what you do or aspire to do can give you the same neurochemical satisfaction as actually doing it. That's problematic. Because once dopamine is released in this context, the urgency to take action diminishes. The brain mistakenly registers talking as doing, and the energy to push forward can fade. This creates a cycle where intentions are expressed, validation is received, but results are delayed or never materialize. Behaviorally, people who protect their goals, who allow effort and progress to speak louder than declarations, maintain a cleaner, more focused dopamine system. Their motivation is internally reinforced, not externally dependent. They experience a deeper and more sustainable form of drive, one that comes from real-time feedback, not imagined success. So, while it might feel satisfying to share what you're doing, there's a measurable cost to motivation when that sharing becomes a substitute for action. If you want to stay driven, stay quiet. Let the reward system in your brain work in your favor, not against it. The human brain is designed to process massive amounts of information quickly. To do this efficiently, it uses shortcuts, what we refer to in psychology and neuroscience as heuristics. One of the most common heuristics is categorization. When we meet someone, hear them speak, or learn a detail about their profession or background, the brain immediately places them into a mental file. This is an adaptive function. It conserves energy by allowing us to make quick judgments based on past experiences. But this process, while efficient, is also highly limiting. Once the brain assigns a label, doctor, artist, marketer, entrepreneur, it automatically activates a set of assumptions. These assumptions are drawn from prior experiences, cultural narratives, and unconscious biases. The individual in front of us is no longer perceived as unique. Instead, they are filtered through a lens of pre-existing definitions. And this is where the problem begins. When you tell people what you do, you surrender control over how you're perceived. You give their brain permission to reduce you to a stereotype. Even if that label is technically accurate, the brain rarely allows for nuance. It generalizes, it simplifies. And once someone's perception of you is set, it becomes neurologically reinforced. Their brain looks for confirming evidence, not contradictory complexity. This is called confirmation bias, a fundamental mechanism that shapes how we interpret everything from social interactions to scientific data. More importantly, once that bias is formed, it restricts your potential in their eyes. It becomes harder to surprise them, influence them, or expand their understanding of who you are. You become a fixed point in their mental map, static, not dynamic. What's more effective is to allow people to observe your behavior and form their own conclusions based on experience rather than labels. When people can't immediately categorize you, their brain stays active longer. It resists the shortcut. That resistance keeps them present, curious, and open. Their attention shifts from, who is this person, to what exactly are they capable of? That shift away from labels and toward lived experience is where true influence begins. When people are forced to build a model of you based on patterns, actions, and outcomes rather than declarations, the neural representation of you in their mind is far more complex, memorable, and accurate. In short, the less you allow others to categorize you too quickly, the more space you create for depth, impact, and long-term perception. Attention is one of the brain's most limited and valuable resources. It's not infinite. It's metabolically expensive. Every second of focused attention burns through neural fuel, oxygen and glucose, in very specific circuits of the prefrontal cortex. This means the brain is constantly evaluating where to allocate attention and how long to maintain it. And here's the key. What we pay attention to becomes our experience of reality. But because attention is so limited, the brain has evolved strict filters to decide what's worth engaging with and what to ignore. When you tell people what you do, especially right away, their brain performs a rapid assessment. Do I already understand this? Is this familiar? Can I file it away quickly and move on? If the answer is yes, they disengage. The attentional system shifts to conserve resources. The interaction becomes passive, not active. What you've done, often unintentionally, is told the brain, you can stop paying attention now. Contrast that with situations where someone holds back just enough information to generate curiosity. The brain doesn't know how to categorize it yet. It stays alert. It begins to predict, to piece together fragments, to search for context. This uncertainty triggers a mild increase in norepinephrine, an arousal chemical linked to alertness, and keeps attentional circuits engaged. People lean in, they listen more closely. They ask questions. Their sensory gating opens up, meaning more information about you is actually being encoded and stored. This is why the most powerful communicators aren't the ones who explain everything up front. They're the ones who modulate tension, who reveal just enough to stimulate engagement but withhold enough to keep the mind active and searching. They respect the biology of how attention works. They understand that mystery, uncertainty, and pacing are tools, not weaknesses. If you want to make a lasting impression, if you want your presence to cut through the noise, you don't do it by flooding people with information. You do it by controlling attention. And that means knowing when not to speak, when not to explain, and when to let the moment of curiosity do the work for you. Because once someone gives you their full attention, the brain primes itself for learning, memory, and emotional association. And that's where influence truly begins, not when you're speaking, but when someone is silently, fully tuned in. Authority, at its core, is a neurobiological response. It's not something you announce, it's something others perceive, often without conscious awareness. When someone walks into a room and people instinctively pay attention, that reaction is not driven by a resume or a title. It's driven by subtle cues, vocal tone, eye contact, posture, timing of speech, and even how comfortable someone is with silence. The brain is constantly scanning for signs of safety, competence, and confidence. This process is deeply embedded in the limbic system and prefrontal cortex. It's fast, automatic, and often invisible. When someone projects calm under pressure, speaks slowly and deliberately, or listens more than they speak, the brain interprets that as control of self, of the environment, and by extension, of others. That interpretation becomes authority. On a physiological level, people with real presence regulate their autonomic nervous system. They're not in fight or flight. Their breathing is slower. Their gestures are more intentional. Their eye movements are steady. These signals are contagious. They regulate the nervous systems of others, often lowering collective anxiety and increasing focus in the room. This is known as physiological coherence, and it creates a felt sense of leadership. By contrast, those who feel the need to constantly declare who they are or what they've done tend to trigger the opposite response. Their communication often carries traces of self-doubt, urgency, or overexertion. These cues are processed rapidly and unconsciously, leading others to question rather than trust. When someone tries too hard to assert authority, the nervous system of the listener picks up on that dissonance, and the message gets rejected, no matter how impressive the content. Real authority is not declared, it's transmitted through behavior, through emotional regulation, and through consistency. It doesn't need to be defended or explained because it's already registered at the biological level. People may not be able to articulate why they follow certain individuals, but their brain has already made the decision. If you want to build authority, don't focus on saying more. Focus on embodying more. Authority emerges when your internal state is aligned with your external expression. And that state, when fully integrated, becomes undeniable to those around you. Curiosity is not just an emotional state. It's a physiological signal to the brain that something in the environment is worth exploring, worth remembering. When we become curious, a very specific set of neural mechanisms are activated, particularly within the hippocampus and the dopaminergic pathways that regulate learning and motivation. The moment curiosity is engaged, the brain essentially primes itself for heightened plasticity. It enters a state of readiness to encode and store information more effectively. This has to do with how the brain prioritizes data. It doesn't simply record everything. It selects, it filters, it holds on to what's emotionally salient, what's novel, and what's predicted to be useful. Curiosity creates that salience. It acts as a signal that the information ahead could help solve a problem, answer a question, or reduce uncertainty, and that makes it neurologically valuable. In fact, studies using functional MRI have shown that when someone is curious about a topic, activity increases not only in memory-related regions, but also in areas tied to reward and attention. That combination of attentional focus and emotional significance essentially engraves the experience more deeply into long-term memory. The mistake most people make in communication is offering answers before activating curiosity. They give information too soon, in too much detail, before the listener's brain is even open to receiving it. But when information follows curiosity, it lands with greater weight, it sticks. Curiosity also creates a state of sustained engagement. The brain's prefrontal cortex begins to hold the question in working memory, keeping attentional networks online until resolution is reached. During this window, the individual is more likely to notice patterns, absorb nuance, and link new data to existing knowledge, all critical components of memory consolidation. So when you withhold what you do, or when you introduce an idea gradually rather than explaining it outright, you aren't just creating mystery, you're activating a neurobiological mechanism that makes your presence more memorable. You're working with the brain's natural tendencies rather than against them. In essence, if you want to be remembered, don't just share facts. Create tension. Let others lean forward instead of pulling them in. When their brain starts asking questions, it's already preparing to hold the answers. That's when memory is no longer accidental. It's deliberate, efficient, and lasting. When we interact with others, whether in conversation, observation, or silent presence, our brains are constantly decoding and reflecting the emotional states, behaviors, and intentions of those around us. This process is made possible by a specialized system of cells known as mirror neurons. These neurons were first discovered when researchers observed that the same brain areas in a monkey fired both when it performed an action and when it simply watched another do the same. In humans, the mirror neuron system is even more complex. It underlies our ability to empathize, to learn through imitation, and to feel emotionally connected to others without the need for verbal explanation. When someone sees another person expressing confidence, fear, calm, or uncertainty, their mirror neurons simulate that state internally. The brain essentially mirrors what it perceives. This doesn't require conscious effort, it's automatic, and it shapes the emotional tone of interactions in real time. This is why people respond more powerfully to behavior than to description. If you tell someone you're calm and competent, but your body language reveals tension, the mirror neuron system picks up on the inconsistency. Their brain tunes into your state, not your words. On the other hand, if you speak slowly, hold your posture, and demonstrate control, that internal regulation is mirrored. The person listening doesn't just understand your confidence, they want to feel it. This process is biologically efficient. It's how infants learn before they have language. It's how trust is built in high-stakes environments. It's how leaders influence groups without needing to dominate conversations. The mirror neuron system makes it possible for states of mind, especially nonverbal ones, to spread across individuals and groups, which is why presence matters more than personal branding. When someone holds back from explaining themselves too quickly and instead leads with calm execution, others naturally pick up on it. Their nervous systems begin to entrain, often without realizing why they're leaning in or trusting more. That entrainment, the synchronization of internal states, is what creates a sense of shared understanding. The practical implication is this: people don't need to be told what you do to understand your value. If you're grounded, focused, and authentic in your actions, their brains will register it before their minds articulate it. You're not just transmitting information, you're transmitting state. And the brain, through the mirror neuron system, is designed to receive and replicate that state faster than any pitch or explanation ever could. Human relationships, whether personal, professional, or social, are governed by complex biological and psychological mechanisms, most of which operate beneath conscious awareness. One of the most powerful among them is the process of trust formation. Trust isn't granted instantly, it's accumulated over time through consistent patterns, perceived safety, and the absence of threat. And crucially, trust is built not just by what we say, but by when and how we choose to reveal information. When someone discloses too much, too quickly, whether it's personal details, credentials, or intentions, the brain of the listener reacts with caution, not closeness. This reaction is rooted in survival circuitry. The amygdala, which plays a key role in detecting threat, becomes more active when it senses unpredictability or overexposure. Rapid disclosure can feel destabilizing. It raises unconscious questions. Why are they telling me this now? What do they want? Can I trust what's being said? By contrast, when disclosure is undelayed, strategically paced based on context, comfort, and behavioral feedback, the brain processes it differently. The prefrontal cortex becomes more involved. This region supports reasoning, evaluation, and empathy. Delayed disclosure signals emotional regulation, control, and self-awareness. It shows that the individual isn't seeking validation or control, but is instead calibrating their behavior based on mutual understanding. This behavior cues the brain to relax its defenses. This pacing of information activates the brain's reward systems, particularly those linked to anticipation. When people feel they're gradually uncovering truth rather than being overwhelmed by it, the experience becomes more meaningful. Each new piece of information is met with attention and curiosity, not resistance. This kind of gradual revelation engages the dopaminergic system, which thrives on small, intermittent rewards. It enhances connection by allowing the other person to feel they're earning insight into who you are. Moreover, delayed disclosure supports a key principle in behavioral neuroscience. Trust is not a static trait, it's a dynamic state, reinforced through pattern recognition. When people witness consistency in behavior over time before deeper truths are revealed, the brain locks onto those patterns. It learns, this person is stable. This person waits. This person earns the right moment to open up. This is not about withholding out of fear or manipulation. It's about respecting the neurobiology of trust. It's about allowing the brain, yours and theirs, to move at a pace where real safety and connection can form. Because when disclosure aligns with genuine timing, not only is the content better received, it's remembered, respected, and reciprocated. The human brain is not wired to retain raw data. It processes numbers, facts, and abstract information through a different set of neural pathways than it does lived experiences or stories. While data activates analytical regions, particularly in the parietal cortex and lateral prefrontal areas, it often fails to engage the emotional and memory systems. That's a problem because for information to stick, it must feel relevant. It must matter on a personal or emotional level. Otherwise, it gets filtered out, lost in the noise. In contrast, narrative activates a much broader network in the brain. When someone hears a story, multiple areas light up simultaneously: language centers in the temporal lobes, sensory and motor cortices, the limbic system for emotion, and the hippocampus for memory consolidation. Essentially, the brain begins to simulate the experience as if it's happening to the listener. This immersive quality makes narrative neurologically richer than data. It's encoded not just as information, but as experience. That simulation is key. When someone observes you acting a certain way, solving problems, or consistently showing up with discipline, their brain doesn't just catalog what you did, it starts building a model of who you are. This model is dynamic, predictive, and rooted in real observation. It carries emotional weight. The brain creates a narrative arc: action, result, character, and that narrative becomes far more compelling than any title, statistic, or verbal summary you could offer. Even brief experiences can build powerful narratives. A single well-timed moment of composure, a sharp insight delivered at the right time, or an observable act of generosity. All of these communicate layers of identity and competence without the need for explanation. When repeated, they form a story in the minds of others, and stories are sticky. They're remembered, shared, and trusted far more than data points. When you tell people what you do, you give them data. But when you show up consistently and let them observe your patterns, you allow them to form a story, one that feels earned, not forced. And when people build the story themselves, it belongs to them. That ownership makes it stronger. It's not something they were told, it's something they discovered. And the brain gives far more value to discovery than to instruction. So if your goal is to be remembered, respected, or trusted, don't focus on the facts. Focus on what people see, feel, and unconstruct through their interaction with you. That's where identity becomes meaningful. That's where influence becomes lasting. When we encounter something unfamiliar, an idea, a behavior, a person who doesn't fit a known pattern, the brain doesn't default to confusion. It actually enters a state of heightened engagement. The prefrontal cortex, particularly the dorsolateral region, becomes more active. This area is responsible for executive function, working memory, decision-making, and focused attention. Mystery doesn't paralyze the brain, it energizes it. It signals that there's something to solve, something important just beyond immediate reach. This state, what could be called cognitive tension, activates additional neuromodulators like dopamine and norepinephrine. Dopamine drives pursuit. It's not about reward itself, but about the anticipation of resolution. Norepinephrine, meanwhile, sharpens focus. It increases signal-to-noise ratio in neural firing, allowing the brain to tune in more tightly to details that might otherwise be missed. The combination of these chemicals puts the brain in a mode of exploration, searching for coherence and meaning and ambiguity. What's especially powerful is that this neurological configuration increases plasticity. When the brain is uncertain, it's more flexible. It's more open to novel inputs, more likely to update internal models, more prepared to form new associations. This is why mystery isn't just useful for attention. It actually accelerates learning and memory formation. It creates a deeper imprint. When someone doesn't immediately define themselves, when their behavior challenges expectations or resists categorization, the brain can't disengage. It stays active. It leans in. It keeps allocating metabolic resources toward decoding that person. And the longer this state is sustained, without frustration or overload, the stronger the eventual impact of whatever is revealed. In other words, mystery isn't a gimmick. It's a biologically grounded tool for shaping how people process and remember information. It invites the brain into a more adaptive, attentive, and reward-sensitive state. The unknown, when carefully managed, becomes the most fertile ground for lasting neural change. Identity is not something fixed or predetermined. Rather, it is a living, evolving construct deeply intertwined with the actions we take every day. Neuroscience reveals that the brain does not passively accept the labels we assign ourselves or others. It actively encodes and reinforces identity through consistent behavior and experience. When you perform an action repeatedly, especially one aligned with a certain value or goal, neural circuits related to that behavior become stronger. This process, known as neuroplasticity, means that who you are at a neural level is literally shaped by what you do. In the brain, regions involved in self-perception, such as the medial prefrontal cortex, integrate sensory feedback, memories, and outcomes of your behavior to construct a coherent sense of self. This integration is dynamic. It constantly updates based on your experiences and choices. When your actions align with a particular identity, say someone who is disciplined or compassionate, dopamine pathways reinforce this alignment by signaling reward and motivation. This creates a feedback loop. The more you act in a way consistent with a desired identity, the more rewarding it feels, and the more likely you are to continue those behaviors. Conversely, when there's a mismatch between what you say you are and what you actually do, the brain experiences cognitive dissonance, a state of internal conflict that is metabolically costly and psychologically uncomfortable. This dissonance often pushes the brain to resolve the inconsistency, either by changing behavior to fit the claimed identity or by adjusting self-perception to match actions. The brain favors coherence and efficiency, so over time, actions tend to sculpt identity more powerfully than words or intentions alone. Additionally, identity shaped through action is more resistant to external disruption because it becomes embedded in deeply ingrained neural patterns. Habits, routines, and consistent behaviors lay down robust pathways in the brain that are harder to override than simple beliefs or declarations. This is why transformation through action is effective. The brain rewires itself in response to lived experience rather than abstract concepts. On a social and interpersonal level, identity expressed through action also influences how others perceive and respond to you. This external feedback loops back into your neural systems via mirror neurons and social cognition networks, reinforcing the sense of self that others recognize and respect. In this way, identity is not just internal, but co-constructed through interaction with the environment and people around you. Ultimately, the neurological basis of identity underscores a fundamental truth. If you want to change who you are or solidify who you want to be, focus first and foremost on your actions. Through repetition, consistency, and alignment with core values, you cultivate a neural architecture that embodies that identity deeply and authentically. Words and intentions have their place, but they must be supported and validated by the tangible patterns of behavior that your brain will encode as you